They gathered for what turned out to be their last meal at 6:48 this morning, the ceremonial breakfast. For months, they had trained together. Astronaut Ellison S from Hawaii, the star of this mission, New Hampshire schoolteacher Christa McAuliffe, mission commander Dick Scobie, pilot Michael Smith, astronauts Judith A and Ronald McNair, and payload specialist Gregory Jarvis. After 3 days of delays, they appeared tired, but quickly rejuvenated by applause as they headed for the launch pad.
Followed by mission specialist G. Resnick, Ron McNair, pilot Mike Smith, followed by Christa McAuliffe, teacher in space, Ellison Onizuka, and payload specialist Greg Jarvis.
Final preparations before liftoff. The ground crew gives McAuliffe an apple for the teacher, and wishes of good luck. Initially, liftoff was scheduled for 9:38 this morning, but again there were problems. A hard freeze overnight left ice on the launch pad, a 2-hour delay, and then NASA discovers a faulty fire detector on board the shuttle, another hour's delay while it's replaced. Finally, the liftoff was set for 11:38. A crowd of some 500 spectators, including 18 visiting school children from McAuliffe's hometown of Concord, New Hampshire, waited anxiously and then counted down. The liftoff appeared flawless. The spectators, including Christa McAuliffe's parents, Grace and Edward Corrigan, watched proudly through tears of joy. 65 seconds into flight, NASA Control orders Commander Scobie to go to full power.
Challenger, go with throttle up. Challenger, go with throttle up.
Suddenly, an explosion.
Flight controllers here looking very carefully at the situation. Obviously a major malfunction.
NASA loses all communication with Challenger, but the crowd still does not realize that something's gone wrong. Within seconds, Challenger disintegrates.
We have a report from the flight dynamics officer that the vehicle has exploded.
For the spectators and Christa McAuliffe's parents, joy turns to confusion, worry, and a realization of tragedy. The $1.2 billion spaceship, its 7 crew members, and their satellite payload disappear.
I thought the flight was going fine. And then I heard them say major malfunction. And then the person beside me said it's exploded. And it was... I couldn't speak. It was...
Within minutes, emergency rescue teams parachuted in, converging on a search area 18 miles east of Cape Canaveral.
Debris continued to fall for 50 minutes and more, and obviously you can't send aircraft and ships into an area where debris is falling, where they themselves may be endangered.
Late this afternoon, after 6 hours of searching, NASA reports they found no survivors.
These searches have not revealed any evidence that the crew of Challenger survived.
Tonight, NASA and Cape Canaveral are in mourning. Tonight at Cape Canaveral, Vice President George Bush, accompanied by Senators Jake Garn and John Glenn, both former astronauts, expressed the nation's condolences to the families of the astronauts. Bush had a special message for American school children.
You must try to understand that spirit, bravery, and commitment are what make not only the space program, but all of life worthwhile. We must never, as people in our daily lives or as a nation, stop exploring, stop hoping, stop discovering. We must press on.
John Quinones, ABC News, Cape Canaveral.
Christa McAuliffe's students and friends at Concord High School were ready to watch a dream come true this morning. Instead, they became witnesses to a nightmare.
2, 1, and liftoff.
In the moments after the launch, their celebrations drowned out the first news of the tragedy. But the clamor turned to quiet as this picture burned itself into their memories.
Reports from the flight dynamics officer indicate that the vehicle apparently exploded and that impact in the water.
Some people were covering their eyes and
and some people just watching the TV set with a blank look on their face.
It was really quite dramatic. At first, you know, everyone was really happy, all these smiles, and then suddenly you saw a lot of people crying in the halls, and it was really pretty sad.
Just moments before, Eileen O'Hara, Christa McAuliffe's good friend and classroom substitute, had shared this haunting sentiment with a local reporter.
Yeah, it's going to be hard to watch because I want her to be safe and I want her to have fun.
Now the public celebration had turned into private mourning and shock.
She was a part of us. She was part of a family. And just like if your sister or brother died, she'll be remembered. It was a hell. It's a hell.
Though Christa McAuliffe's students and friends have known her here in Concord for years, she became known to the nation when she decided to pursue her dreams. Those dreams had been sparked by President Reagan's announcement a year ago for a teacher astronaut. The search for that history maker brought 11,000 applications, but only one made the final grade.
And the winner, the teacher who will be going into space, Christa McAuliffe.
From the outset, she approached this mission and her training with the same ideals she brought to the classroom.
Well, it was a challenge, and it was something that I always ask my students, you know, to go and seek whatever they feel they can do and reach a little higher.
She wore her spirit on her face, and her hometown loved it. Now they are remembering it. A special counselor will be brought to Concord High tomorrow to help students begin dealing with their loss. But perhaps Christa McAuliffe's own words echo the best advice.
To follow your instincts and go for your dreams, and I hope they achieve that.
Jay Shadler, ABC News, Concord, New Hampshire.
When they posed, it was like a portrait of America. Men and women, war veterans and first-time astronauts, parents, and even a classical pianist. Their commander was Francis Scobie, age 46, from Washington State, an astronaut after 22 years in the Air Force. This was his second shuttle mission. Second in command, pilot Michael Smith, age 40, a decorated Navy pilot from North Carolina. Like Scobie, he'd seen combat in Vietnam and trained as a test pilot. And like the commander, he was a husband and father. This was Smith's first shuttle mission. Mission specialist Ellison Onizuka was the first Hawaiian astronaut who believed in the benefits of the space program.
There are a lot of outcomes from these projects which will affect both our society and the rest of the world.
Onizuka is survived by his wife and two daughters. 36-year-old mission specialist Judy Resnick was a shuttle veteran, her assignment to operate the shuttle's mechanical arm. She was on board the shuttle Discovery in 1984 when a launch was aborted after the engines had fired. Gregory Jarvis was on board to conduct tests on the effects of weightlessness on liquids carried in tanks. Born in Detroit, trained as an Air Force satellite engineer, Jarvis was on his first shuttle mission. Ronald McNair, age 36 from South Carolina, brought a background in physics and laser technology to the shuttle program. This was the second trip to space for a husband and father who saw space travel as a calling for mankind.
I see it as something that we must do, and I see it as something that's part of man's nature to explore.
These six, along with Christa McAuliffe, the first teacher in space, now a tragic page in NASA history. Stone Phillips, ABC News.
Textbook, picture perfect, and then suddenly a tiny flame just where the fuel lines go from the big external tank into Challenger itself. On the left, with the arrow, a plume where gases from the tank are forming, obviously feeding the fire. Now you will see the flame creeping up the external tank in between the tank and the shuttle itself. This is the beginning of the huge, catastrophic explosion that absolutely engulfed the entire system. You will see a second explosion right at the top of that big external tank. This is obviously what put the entire thing into flames and probably what destroyed the shuttle almost instantly. Now for a moment the smoke clears and we see emerging apparently the top of Challenger. We think this is the last picture we have ever seen of Challenger before it fell to the sea with its precious cargo. And as the sequence is going to continue, you will see that mammoth, horrible explosion on the right. One of the solid rocket boosters split away now from the tank and the shuttle itself. These boosters cannot be controlled once they're lit, so it has obviously gone off on its own or into the wrong place, but it does not appear, I repeat, appear from what we can see that it was the cause of the explosion or that anything happened to it.
Christa McAuliffe. Or is that you?
It was. But when the 36-year-old Concord, New Hampshire high school teacher heard Vice President Bush call her name, she didn't feel much like herself.
It's not often that a teacher is at a loss for words. I know my students wouldn't think so.
The words she finally found were praised for the 9 other finalists she beat out in the competition to become the first American teacher in space.
When that shuttle goes, there might be one body. But there's going to be 10 souls that I'm taking with me. Thank you.
That's great. Christa McAuliffe's joy was celebrated by her husband and 2 children back in Concord. Her 8-year-old son, Scott, seemed especially pleased.
But she's going to bring one of my frogs up.
Bye-bye, thank you.
So I can at least tell my friends that my frog went up.
Ignition and liftoff.
After months of preparation, Christa McAuliffe will board the Space Shuttle Challenger next January 22nd and lift off into Earth orbit, something she's dreamed about since youth.
When she left her classroom behind for a semester of space training, 37-year-old Christa McAuliffe temporarily traded 12 years of teaching for a new kind of learning. Listen to her description of the airplane ride that simulates zero gravity.
As you peak that parabola at the top, you have about 20 or 30 seconds of weightlessness, and all of a sudden, just like Peter Pan, you start flying up, and it was just unbelievable.
That's the enthusiasm that's made her a favorite of students at Concord High School in New Hampshire. This is where the Boston-born social studies teacher lives with her husband and 2 children, and where she put together her winning lesson plan. It's clear from her NASA application that Christa McAuliffe took special care to relate her classes here at Concord High School to what she calls the real world. Her philosophy of teaching, she wrote, stresses community activities. The economics class finds out how local construction projects impact the city. Law classes visit the local courts.
You want to cook? She can take very complex concepts and simplify them, but not water them down. And she makes all her students understand things, but in an interesting manner.
She was explaining like the assembly line process, and she went into this story about when she used to package Twinkies on an assembly line. And I mean, I just laughed so hard, but I'm not gonna forget it.
That's also what helped her application stand out among the 11,000 NASA received. When she reported to NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston, she was poked and prodded and outfitted and observed.
She's a sort of a risk taker. She does the unusual, the way she runs a class, and she's not afraid of things. She lives life. She's not afraid of it.
Teachers are always prepared.
And while she taught history and economics, her students figured out there was something else on her mind, too.
Even on the quizzes, she'd throw in an extra credit quiz about what are the 5 names of the space shuttle. So we always knew her interest in space was high.
McAuliffe's crewmates have graded her well, acknowledging theirs will always be known as the teacher mission. And she hopes the lesson about space travel on the shuttle will not just be for youngsters.
People, actually, adults had asked me, how many stops is that shuttle going to make? Bring me back a moon rock.
It's the kind of misinformation Christa McAuliffe wants to correct. And it's why the high school teacher from New England won't be watching the next space shuttle launch. She'll be on it. Lynn Scher, ABC News, Concord, New Hampshire.
After 11:30 Eastern Time, it appeared that all was going well until there was a massive explosion in space. NASA has confirmed that there was an explosion with the capsule, the shuttle itself. Aboard this flight, of course, the first teacher in space, Christa McAuliffe from New Hampshire. Also aboard the flight, pilot Mike Smith, Commander Dick Scobie, Judy Resnick, and there it is. There you see that massive explosion in space. Obviously a very serious accident. Let's listen to Mission Control. No communication at this precise point. They have assured us that all rescue procedures have been put into effect. But line of sight, it certainly appears to be a most serious accident, unlike anything else in the shuttle program. John Quinones at Cape Canaveral.
Here looking very carefully at the situation.
John, what do we know?
Well, Steve, no one is saying anything here other than there has been an explosion. Contingency procedures are underway.
recovery forces have been sent out into the field. Preliminary word is that the remains of the vehicle have landed somewhere in the ocean. We don't know how far, but there's been no explanation as to what happened about 90 seconds after liftoff, and it was a picture-perfect liftoff. Suddenly, as you saw it there, it exploded. There is no word on what happened.
The president is concerned. He is saddened. He is very anxious to have more information on it. At the moment, as I say, we're learning most of our information from what the public is getting.
With me now,
President Reagan.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd planned to speak to you tonight to report on the State of the Union. But the events of earlier today have led me to change those plans. Today is a day for mourning and remembering. Nancy and I are pained to the core by the tragedy of the Shuttle Challenger. We know we share this pain with all of the people of our country. This is truly a national loss. 19 years ago, almost to the day, we lost 3 astronauts in a terrible accident on the ground. But we've never lost an astronaut in flight. We've never had a tragedy like this. And perhaps we've forgotten the courage it took for the crew of the shuttle. But they, the Challenger 7, were aware of the dangers, but overcame them and did their jobs brilliantly. We mourn 7 heroes: Michael Smith, Dick Scobie, Judith Resnick, Ronald McNair, Ellison S, Gregory Jarvis, and Christa McAuliffe. We mourn their loss as a nation together. The families of the 7, we cannot bear, as you do, the full impact of this tragedy. But we feel the loss, and we're thinking about you so very much. Your loved ones were daring and brave, and they had that special grace, that special spirit that says, give me a challenge, and I'll meet it with joy. They had a hunger to explore the universe and discover its truths. They wished to serve, and they did. They served all of us. We've grown used to wonders in this century. It's hard to dazzle us. But for 25 years, the United States space program has been doing just that. We've grown used to the idea of space, and perhaps we forget that we've only just begun. We're still pioneers. They, the members of the Challenger crew, were pioneers. And I want to say something to the school children of America who were watching the live coverage of the shuttle's takeoff. I know it's hard to understand, but sometimes painful things like this happen. It's all part of the process of exploration and discovery. It's all part of taking a chance and expanding man's horizons. The future doesn't belong to the faint-hearted. It belongs to the brave. The Challenger crew was pulling us into the future, and we'll continue to follow them. I've always had great faith in and respect for our space program, and what happened today does nothing to diminish it. We don't hide our space program. We don't keep secrets and cover things up. We do it all up front and in public. That's the way freedom is, and we wouldn't change it for a minute. We'll continue our quest in space. There will be more shuttle flights and more shuttle crews, and yes, more volunteers, more civilians, more teachers in space. Nothing ends here. Our hopes and our journeys continue. I want to add that I wish I could talk to every man and woman who works for NASA or who worked on this mission and tell them your dedication and professionalism have moved and impressed us for decades, and we know of your anguish. We share it. There's a coincidence today. On this day, 390 years ago, the great explorer Sir Francis Drake died aboard ship off the coast of Panama. In his lifetime, the great frontiers were the oceans, and a historian later said he lived by the sea, died on it, and was buried in it. Well, today, we can say of the Challenger crew, their dedication was, like Drake's, complete. The crew of the Space Shuttle Challenger honored us for the manner in which they lived their lives. We will never forget them, nor the last time we saw them, this morning, as they prepared for their journey and waved goodbye and slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God. Thank you.
They gathered in the open air, surrounded by the buildings that house the space program, for a simple, plain memorial service.
We are gathered here today as a family that shares a common dream, common goal, common commitment, and now a common tragic and devastating loss.
The President and Mrs. Reagan sat with the immediate family members of the lost crew, and behind them sat other relatives and friends, space agency officials and employees, members of Congress and other dignitaries, including Senator Edward Kennedy, whose brother, the President, gave the space program such a boost, and that President's children, John F. Kennedy Jr. and Caroline. They all heard Mr. Reagan strike a note of sadness and of perseverance.
We remember Ronald McNair, who said that he learned perseverance in the cotton fields of South Carolina. His dream was to live aboard the space station, performing experiments and playing his saxophone in the weightlessness of space. Well, Ron, we will miss your saxophone, and we will build your space station.
The most emotional moments of the ceremony came at the end, when the Reagans said goodbye to the family members. A final salute as T-38 trainers flew over in the missing man formation. Challenger crew gone, but not forgotten.
The orbiter, where the astronauts live and work during their time in space. The huge orange fuel tank in the center. This aluminum skin tank burns liquid fuel through the ascent stage and is discarded after use. The solid rocket boosters, 2 of them, one on either side. These reusable tubes burn solid rocket fuel and supply the tremendous power needed to lift the spacecraft into orbit. From the start, speculation on the cause of the tragedy centers on the solid rocket boosters, or SRBs.
NASA investigators have been painstakingly studying impounded photographs, videotapes, and all flight data from Challenger's 1 minute and 15-second ascent to disaster. Tonight, the investigating board released videotape and photographs, which clearly indicates the possibility of a fuel leak. NASA calls it a plume on one of the shuttle's solid rocket boosters.
The videotape and the still photo frames show an unusual plume on the right-hand SRB, which is under investigation.
Officials will not comment on the cause or the effect of the fuel leak, but sources close to their investigation have told ABC News' Jules Bergman that Challenger's explosion is believed to have been ignited by the rupture of a seam within the rocket booster on Challenger's right side. Flames shot directly at the shuttle's external fuel tank, sources say, and 9 seconds later, Challenger erupted in a massive fireball. NASA says investigators must examine thousands more pictures before they draw any conclusions. President Reagan today shunted NASA aside in favor of an outside commission to investigate the Challenger disaster.
It's time now to assemble a group of distinguished Americans to take a hard look at the accident, to make a calm and deliberate assessment of the facts, and ways to avoid repetition.
The President said he wants a report within 120 days. William P. Rogers, Secretary of State in the Nixon administration, was named chairman of the commission. Neil Armstrong, former astronaut and first man on the moon, vice chairman. Other members, former test pilot Chuck Yeager, astronaut Sally Ride, Nobel physicist Richard Feynman, and Washington lawyer David Acheson.
Chairman William Rogers swore in his blue ribbon panel this morning, and they got right to work, taking testimony from top NASA officials, much of it a kind of primer on the space shuttle system. But they quickly discounted recent speculation that below freezing temperatures on launch day might have contributed to the accident.
We had no concern for performance or safety of the flight articles at that time, nor do I even at this time.
Although they admitted the solid rocket fuel is not meant to be used in temperatures below 40 degrees, they said the bulk mean temperature at launch time was well above that. And they said while there was some concern that rubber O-rings used to seal the rocket joints might be affected by the cold weather, shuttle managers and Morton Thiokol, who make the rocket boosters, were convinced there was no problem at a meeting the night before launch.
And the discussion centered around the integrity of the O-rings under lowered temperature. And Thiokol recommended to proceed in the launch.
The focus of today's commission meeting was seals, specifically the twin rubber O-rings designed to keep solid rocket fuel from leaking out of the metal casing. NASA officials admitted that examination of boosters retrieved from previous flights indicated some failures of the seal system at the field joint, the spot where two segments are joined and where the flame appeared that may have caused the shuttle explosion. There were 7 instances of hot gas jets searing through the putty lining and causing partial erosion of the primary O-ring. There were 2 instances of soot deposits behind the primary O-ring. And although NASA says a secondary seal was eroded only once on a different joint, they never observed the sort of complete burn-through that could have triggered Challenger's demise. In any event, they said their own testing had assured them the seals were still holding and they had plenty of margin for safety.
We could take 3 times what the maximum amount of erosion that we had observed, and thus we concluded that that was a acceptable situation.
That's not what NASA employee Richard Cook said in a memo to his boss last summer. He wrote of potential failure of the O-rings that could be catastrophic. Today, Cook testified that as a controller, he'd written the memo for budgetary reasons, but under intense questioning from Chairman William Rogers, he explained,
I wrote it because I felt that it was a serious enough situation that until these various issues were resolved with the SRBs, that they had to be taken care of before the shuttle could safely continue.
New pictures released by
illustrate why the investigation has so far focused on the rocket as the source of the accident. The theory is the intense pressure of the rocket motor at its height 0.6 of a second after ignition broke through the seals of a rocket joint, starting the deadly chain of events. That's one of the issues examined by the Presidential Commission in 15 hours of investigation over 2 days here in Florida. Chairman William Rogers said the panel talked to officials of NASA and Morton Thiokol, the rocket manufacturer. And the group inspected the joint connecting 2 segments of the rocket booster. One commissioner, Nobelist Richard Feynman, said the O-ring failure, quote, looks like the most likely cause at this point.
For the first
Commission, come to order, please.
David, it was the only show in town, if not in the country this week, and the President's Commission on the Shuttle disaster saw its best evidence yet of what may have occurred. Photographs of the shuttle showing a puff of black smoke from the suspect right booster rocket at the moment of launch itself.
We feel that that's a leak, may or may not be related to temperature, and we feel it's coming out of the most likely spot is the joint between the aft booster and the aft segment.
It's widely believed now that a seal gave way in a joint in one of the rocket boosters, and that this caused the plume of white-hot exhaust gas later in flight, which apparently touched off the explosion that destroyed Challenger and its crew of 7. It was originally seen exclusively as a case of equipment failure, but this week's hearings revealed a failure in human communications as well. NASA, it turns out, knew for years the seals were flawed, and the night before launch, warnings the shuttle could explode were disregarded. Monday, January 27th, a scheduled launch is aborted because of bad weather. The temperature turns cold, so cold that night foot-long icicles begin forming on the pad. Engineers at Morton Thiokol, which manufactures the boosters, call a teleconference and unanimously recommend against launch the next day.
I made the direct statement that if anything happened to this launch, told them I sure wouldn't want to be the person that had to stand in front of a board of inquiry to explain why I launched this outside of the qualification of the solid rocket motor.
There was never one positive pro-launch statement ever made by anybody.